Going live. All right, everybody. Welcome to the Growing with Fishes podcast, episode 239. This week, we have SolShine Growing talking to us about copyleft cannabis. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's kind of the spiritual successor to Open Cannabis Project, and we're excited to have him on the show and kind of talk to people about, this topic in a way that's not gloom and doom, and kind of get into some interesting things and ideas that I think a lot of people haven't talked about or heard about before. So I think it's going to be a fun show. Before we get started, I wanted to give a quick a quick plug for our class, if you aren't aware. Marty and I do have a full online Aquaponic cannabis class available over at apmjclass.com. We have over 650 slides, hundreds of hours of recorded content. It's a really, really awesome class. We have guides on all different types of insects, farm tours, all different types of cool stuff. So definitely check that out. And then we also have apmjnewts.com. If you need nutrients or testing, you can check that out over there. Alrighty, thanks a lot for joining us. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what copyleft cannabis is? I think a lot of people haven't heard about the concept of utilizing patents in a non-destructive way for cannabis. And I'd love for you to educate everybody on how they can be used maybe in a more positive way.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Great to be on, and thank you so much for having me. I'm SolShine Growing, or Caleb, and I'm an ethnobotany student, as well as for about the last 9 years, medical marijuana grower, amateur plant breeder, and I've done a number of startup projects and some invention in my past, some work with patenting and whatnot. So I'm just coming out of watching the evolution of cannabis and being kind of in the back seat, doing some consulting here and there, taking care of my own grows and friends and family's grows, and seeing the need in this space, in the evolution of the cannabis space, just like the evolution of many spaces, to engage with the IP world, the intellectual property world, in a good way. So I'm working, coordinating with a small growing group of people, and we'd love to have people who are listening involved as well, to form a not-for-profit, copyleft cultivars. And that's going to be to preserve and protect plant genetics, breeders, and cultivators with copyleft Creative Commons. A lot of people might not be familiar with copyleft as a process or what copyleft means. It's essentially taking copyright and copyright law and then flipping that so that it serves the common good, and so that it serves to protect freedom libre, as in freedom, not free as in free beer, is a common saying in the free software movement. So yeah, just carrying on that legacy and bringing that system now to the cannabis market as it engages with the larger legal system.
So can you explain the structure and kind of how that works?
Yeah, so in patenting and copyright, those are two kind of interconnected sections of the law. And when you look at patenting, for example, there's a big process of actually formulating a patent applications with the USPTO, usually involving attorneys, and then there's a lot of different types of patents and a lot of patent litigation that goes on. And then there's, in copyright, similarly, you want to have it formulated in some sort of readable manner, but the barrier is much lower. In fact, in a lot of cases, most notoriously music or software, as soon as you create the work, as soon as you create the artistic work, then that work is distilled in a readable format, and then you have the copyright. So there isn't the same filing process. Then as that evolves, certain things can be trademarked, certain marks can be filed with the government similar to a patent, but it's a lot more accessible to people. And so patenting has been traditionally used by a lot of large groups in other sectors. And I think there's a bit of a push in cannabis to look at using that in cannabis and with plants. But I think we can actually take examples from the free software movement in software and from other agricultural movements as well, and use copyright. So that's the approach that we're taking. In order to make that possible, there needs to be an organization that actually offers and defends the copyleft license. So, you know, when you would make this copyright, when you would make a new thing, how would you introduce it to the world? You'd introduce it to the world through an agreement with a nonprofit that says this is a common good, and you know the nonprofit can assure that it is safe as a common good, protect the people that use it, protect the originator of it. And so, yeah, that's why we're looking to use the formation of a nonprofit.
Awesome. How would this work for a breeder, and why would they use this over some other method? Do they need to have, you know, what do they need to have in order to even try to get the stuff together to utilize this?
Yeah, well, I think there's several layers to that. You know, first, there's just wanting to do good for the community and for the future. When we use things in the common good, I feel like it's very empowering then to build on them and then put it back into the common good. All of the strains that we know and love were put out into the public domain. They've been released, and when you get a cut, when you get some seeds, there's typically no restrictions on what you do with that. And so we see the flourishing of abundance in cannabis that there is. I like to think of chairs, you know, and it's kind of funny, like chairs, okay. But chairs are a simple thing that we use all the time. And back when chairs were first invented, you know, there wasn't an intellectual property system. And the idea was released out into the world as ideas naturally do. And as a result, we have all of the abundance of chairs. And you and I and most of the listeners use chairs either today or most days of our lives. And we don't really think about that, right? But if you were to do an improvement on some chair design, put it out to the world, maybe someone would notice it and be like, yeah, this actually really solves like a lower back issue that I have, or, you know, who knows what. But this is what's really empowering about putting something into the common good, is we get to see then so many people benefited, more people benefited than if we had to make individual patent agreements and licensing agreements with each one of them. So imagine then if the person who originated a chair had lived in a time when intellectual property existed, and the chair then was restricted under some sort of copyright restriction, trademark restriction, or patent restriction. We wouldn't have swivel chairs. We may not even have armchairs as an existing phenomena, as an idea in reality. You know, it's not just that someone might not put it out there and make money from it, but someone might not even work on the idea because it's dangerous, because ultimately the intellectual property system is a system of prohibition. It's a system of getting registration with the government in order to prohibit the future use of that thing in ways that the intellectual property rights holder doesn't want. So if you don't want your work to be taken and distorted, maybe have one small change put onto it and then have it privatized and locked away, and you want to see it create many progenious work, many things, many new strains or many new products or many new discoveries in the world, you want scientists and cultivators to be able to access it, patients and recreational enjoyers to be able to benefit from it, then putting it into a copyleft system, having a protected form of open source is the way to go for you. And not only that, but then you're part of a system, you're part of a community like we've seen with free software. And it's really astounding to see, if you look at the history of free software and open source software, how it started out, from Richard Stallman back at MIT, and then having him in 1985 found the Free Software Foundation. And then that's just a small group, and it builds, and until now, groups like Google are going to court and defending open source. They're paying people. There's people being paid by large corporations to work on open source and release it into the public, work on open source code and products. And it's because the system works. It works really super, super well. And if anybody wants to check out why it works, this system has been around now long enough in other fields that we understand why it works. There's a great book called The Cathedral and the Bazaar by Eric Raymond, and he talks about why, the bazaar where we're all sharing these ideas, why that might actually create more abundance than the citadel where things are isolated and only people with granted permissions can work on them. And so we've seen in software, open source systems have overtaken, and you're probably right now listening to this on an Android or a laptop system that involves some sort of open source. If you're listening to it on a mobile device, you're certainly working through some sort of open source backbone, whether that's the iOS that's built on an open source or Android that's built on an open source backbone. And so those developers are being paid. And this is the kind of ecosystem we want to create, right? When you think about where cannabis is headed, there's all this fear and like you mentioned, Steve, in the beginning, the doom and gloom. And I think that is the path that happens if we don't do anything. That's the path that happens if the grassroots people, the breeders, just let it happen. And then it's defined for us. If we don't create the idea ecosystem, one will be created for us, like has happened in corn and infamously with Monsanto. Over 400 small farmers sued without evidence, out of business, many of them, due to these seed patents and the litigations. And so having a system like this in place helps to prevent that, helps to make it so that we can protect the people that use it, helps protect the varietals, and then maybe creates this ecosystem which, when the big players come in, instead of trying to litigate people to death, they benefit from it. We all benefit from it, and they work with it. And we're able to all create this idea sharing economy, create this wealth of information, and breeders then have access to that. They have access to the resources from that. They have access to the high breeding software, the high-tech breeding software that can be offered through this system with the corpus of information, the mass knowledge set of all of the copylefted genetics, any growing data from that, and that can be made available. So breeders opting into this system, I think there's a ton of advantages. And then finally, to round it all off, really there's the direct and palpable safety, knowing that you're not going to have to deal with IP litigation in the same way that someone who's just out there without some form of protection would. And, in the tech industry, unfortunately, that's more than 10,000 tech companies each year who are sued by a patent troll. 84% of high-tech patent lawsuits are related to patent trolls, and it's $2.8 million USD. for the average cost of defense. So I don't think a lot of breeders out there, a lot of cultivators have $2.8 million on average cost to spend on patent litigation. We need a better answer. And so I feel, and a lot of people are agreeing, that we need a community organization which can stand together and make it so that this idea ecosystem is out there, available, make all these resources available, and interconnect all these breeders so that it's not just one breeder or one group fighting, having to pay $2.8 million average in attorney's fees, but instead it's an organization stepping in saying, no, you can't pick on the small breeder. No, you can't pick on the small cultivator, and actually intervening. And the open cannabis license, actually I have a copy here, the open cannabis license that Stoney put together based off of Creative Commons licenses from software and the open source seed initiative, which does this for food crops. It actually allows then the beneficiary organization, the nonprofit, to intervene. So it's a really powerful tool to create community action and to bond together. And I believe we have the opportunity now as a community to put it into action and to get this in place before the big actors, the big lawsuits come in. I know we're already seeing a few of them with the Wrigley's lawsuit, for example. And, you know, this is unfortunately won't be the last. And before too long, just like with agriculture, it will reach its way down to genetics. It'll reach its way down to the strains, control of the plant itself, control of the actual thing that produces the flower, and who can grow the nice new flower, or if someone can't even make or conceptualize or get the seed stock to create, or legally create with the seed stock they have, that new cannabis. So I think we have a great opportunity now to put that in place and make that option available for the community.
So there's some people in chat that don't quite understand it. So what explain to people that are maybe afraid of this or worried that this could be quickly sold off to a Monsanto or something like that, that would be, you know, how do you answer those types of things? Because I don't think they quite understand how that all works, and that's definitely something I hear a lot of people concerned about. So I'd love to hear you talk about, especially with, you know, there was a company before that went out and really misled a lot of breeders and started, another company to do their data collection that later became, ended up dissolving because of it. But what do you say to the people that are worried about it? Because I'd love to see, you know, you've definitely addressed this really well in some of the other times I've heard you talk about it. So
yeah, I think that's a really valid point, and that's something I've thought a lot about. So that really is the reason we need to have a nonprofit. And as we're bringing this together, when we put these things into the public access to them means that they can't just be pulled back down. You know, we're not making any sort of package behind a pay door of the genetics. And I think that's really critical here. There's nowhere for that type of product to be developed. And that really aligns with some of my key values in this: transparency, grassroots involvement. You know, I'm coming out of the sidelines to make this happen because I feel that it needs to be addressed. You know, yeah, we've seen other approaches come up, but I don't think they've been adequate, and I don't think they're the right approach. And that's not the fault of any of the people who have taken that on. I see it as a very tricky situation that's very tricky to craft a solution for. As I see it, the solution is a nonprofit that has transparency built deeply into it, that the community is essentially involved on a foundational level within, and where we're making everything that comes in terms of genetic data available to the public so that it can be the tide that lifts all boats. I also want to make the key distinction. There have been other groups, for example, the Open Cannabis Project, where they have put forward a good ethos towards this, but again, their approach maybe is under the name of open source, but is actually more of a public domain approach. Their mission was to document cannabis plants to create prior art and prevent overboard patents. And I think that's noble. And I think that that's great. And I really respect the people who responded to conflicts and brought that openly, transparently to the community. And so, yeah, there's now the open gap there. And I think that we can create in this gap, in this niche, an answer that's maybe better. And comes, like I've been saying, from the free software movement, where it's been tried, where there have been in-court victories, like Jacobs v. Katzer, that shows that this can actually be enforced in court. Copyleft is actually enforceable under copyright. Other victories that have shown that it can be enforceable under copyright and contract breach doubly. And, you know, a slew of different victories for this copyleft approach. Public domain doesn't have the defense element. And so it might get the information out there. They don't necessarily have the same prerogative to get it out there, but it is, you know, part of the process of open source is eventually bringing it out there, versus in our approach, it's implicit, you know, as it is published, that right is established more fully, more defensively. And so in that approach, we have to bring it to the public, you know, we have to make it available to even make it, you know, defensible. And that's why I think that the copyleft approach is a little bit better than public domain approaches. There's other groups that are doing really great projects. Cannapedia, for example, that is an open system for many different types. So they're just hosting genetic data from lots of different types of intellectual property arrangements and lots of testing data. And so an approach more like that is what we're looking at. But I still don't think that they fill this niche. Really, we need something, again, that creates this ecosystem, this idea ecosystem. So it's going to be more than just the nonprofit. It's not just that you're assigning something to the nonprofit. You're actually assigning it essentially to the public good, to the commons, and then that's made public to the commons, you know, all of us, all beings. And we then, the nonprofit acts as the beneficiary of that and defends it, defends the users of it. So I think that overcomes some of these other attempts. There's also cool things we can try to do that even go beyond this. Some of you might have seen the TED Talk by the attorney Damian Reel, and he talks about copywriting all melodies to avoid accidental infringement. I think that's a great idea. There's a finite amount of genetic sequences, just like a finite amount of musical sequences. And so we'd like to explore that option as well. That's just been brought to my attention more recently. We may be able to do that with cannabis as well. So I think there's layers of approaches, but having the nonprofit, which inherently built into it has this transparency as a center node, so to speak, or a glue to hold this idea ecosystem together, that's the key. And that transparent nature, the fact that it's not siloed into anything, the fact that there's not internal research that's not being shared in a developmental or proprietary manner, you know, that it's all open, that prevents inherently some of the issues with having it bought off and having it privatized. We'd also like to design within the infrastructure of the nonprofit itself provisions which prevent that, and I believe that we can. I've seen some examples, and we're working with some great people, also some lawyers who, shout out to the wonderful lawyers who are helping us and giving us some great feedback on this. So we're working together, and we'd love to have additional feedback from people. There's nonprofit experts who are listening, screaming out that there's a way to do it. Like, I want to hear from you. Let's do it. That's the point of having a nonprofit project. You know, it's by the community for the community. I just stepped out here to put it into action, seeing that it wasn't there, seeing this open space, and having had some experience in similar fields, not wanting the sort of IP issues that I've faced to be facing our industry and facing the plant that I love so much. So we all need to come together on this. You know, that's a big reason why I'm out here and why I'm on this show, is really to get the word out, to get people involved, to get breeders ready to help to have their work protected, to make this idea accessible to people. And then if people want to run with it in their own ways, or they want to step in and get involved more fully, they want to give feedback, you know, I welcome that. And that's another way that we keep this open and keep this of the people, and keep this non-proprietary and public.
So I had a question for you on the patent side, because this just seems like, and this to me is just like the goofy ass weird, like using a hammer for, you know, the wrong thing, kind of like a sledgehammer for a finishing nail kind of problem. But what if you took a date, like would this function in court? Could you just take your DNA profile from your strain and then take a picture of it and then make it a non-fungible token and then patent it that way as a copyright protect?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I think there is some serious possibility with the NFTs angle. There's a really interesting thing that happens where the law describes a basic concept, and then in our American legal system, lawyers fight sometimes over the course of 100 different cases to chip down to how the law applies to reality. And NFTs has no precedent to my knowledge. There's no legal background. So that's a huge uphill battle to try to win these. And I think that's a key takeaway that viewers can remember, is we want to be pragmatic. We don't want to reinvent the wheel and create a super complicated system that then we have to fight and establish. We want, if possible, 1-2 steps in order to have it established that are well documented and that have good previous establishment, say court precedent, for example. And I think that's where things like NFTs have a ton of potential, and I'm excited for where that's headed. And I don't necessarily think that that's the best route to it. I think that just any method of making the genetics available and readable, by my understanding and based off of a number of different law opinions and law reviews that I've read, that constitutes a copyright right. You know, you've created the artistic work. In a way, as a breeder, we are programmers. You know, if we're creating through the breeding process, through selection, a certain code, editing the code of the genetics, that genetic code is much like a computer program, right? Then when it's read, it creates the functions, and then that leads to the program or the plant growing out, whether that's via electrical signals or via proteins and protein folding. But nonetheless, we've created a code that can be ran to produce a thing. And so in a way, we're just genetic programmers. And then all of the programming case law should apply. And as far as I'm aware, that's just one step. You know, that's very pragmatic, because it's all we need to do is prove that this vast legal doctrine applies to cannabis, and that's not a hard sell in a court of law. You know, with patents, that has been established with plants in general, and I think that's where patents have one advantage. But I think that the supreme disadvantage of patents is that if you just don't have the money to defend it in court, then you really may not hold on to that patent in the end. I actually had this happen to me in a past business with green energy technology, and we went and we got a defensive patent on it. And then through a series of litigation and just running us out of funds, essentially, we lost control of the patent, and the business was obliterated and shut down. So it's it happens to many people. And I think, I think that we can prevent that type of thing from happening if we use a copyleft system. The patent system may be very functional for big conglomerates or big businesses, and I respect the people that choose to go that method and that route, and I ask them to question whether they can afford to defend that, knowing that an LLC cannot self-represent. And so if you have this under an LLC or business, you will have to pay the attorney's fees. If you do not, you likely will still need to pay the attorney's fees, because being pro se is very difficult. And that is not an issue with copyleft. With copyleft, you don't have the same issue where you're having to fight to defend those rights, because they're considered more of a public good. And so you have groups like Copyleft Cultivars is intended to be, a not-for-profit that can defend it, or Free Software Foundation in the software movement. So there's these organizations that then are ways for us to all come together and have collective strength. And I think we all know that singularly we are small and relatively weak. I'm just me, but if we bond together, many people are very strong. We're like a bundle of twigs, and one twig can snap very easily, especially when a large amount of pressure is exerted on it, say from large scale litigation, analogously. And if we all come together, there's a large bundle here, right? And then if one stick is being pressed on super hard, we're able to all support and hold this together. And so this is the grassroots approach, which I think is distinct and can work hand in hand with patents. There are some people talking in the cannabis community about having a defensive league, a defensive IP league, and I really support that. I'd love for copyleft cultivars to be a part of that. Yeah, that's a great example. Absolutely.
Those of you who don't know, at somewhere in Southeast Asia, they build these out of tree bark, and they'll take a tree and put it across a bridge to make a bridge, and then they run the roots across it from the strangler figs and a couple of the other trees, and then it forms these natural bridges that can last 1,000 years or more and survive floods and everything else, and not ever break. So anyways, remind me of that when you were talking about it.
Yeah, I think that's that connects in really well to something I feel is deeply central to this. It's the Indigenous perspective. And, we all come from Indigenous people. Our ancestors somewhere along the way were Indigenous. And that togetherness, that sense of community, the ethos of sharing is caring, that is in our blood. That's how we as humans survived. We showed each other, like, here's how you make fire. And then their family thrived too. And then we traded and we did well. And, there's this togetherness and this sense of community good that's instilled within each of us. And, my my Native American ancestors and Siletz and Cherokee and Sioux, they all had different ideas of how how new ideas moved around, but they all had an emphasis on sharing. And there's no indigenous community, no ancestral community that included intellectual property rights. You know, there was no one person creating a concept and then deciding what someone else does with it. There was really like you kept an idea to yourself, you know, a trade secret, so to speak, or you shared it with the community. And, you know, if you wanted to share it to the community and then you would benefit from it directly, you could experience that immediately, you know? And in the modern world, it's so much bigger. It takes a little bit more time to experience it. But in this process of evaluating whether this is the right approach to take, you know, I've talked to a couple hundred people actually at this point in the cannabis community with really great perspectives and a lot of experience. And some of the old timers I've talked to have talked about seeing their work carry forward and how much joy that brings them and how empowering that is. And I think that that is something that is not as highlighted in the modern era, but it's something that we feel really deeply. You know, there's the keys to happiness throughout life, the keys to feeling fulfilled. Like one of them is actually contributing. You know, one of them is this contribution to society and helping of others. And I think that's really fundamental to how we feel good about ourselves, especially getting older into life. And so this sort of a system puts that value first. And to put this into context, you know, this isn't a new idea. This idea that we share ideas, it's timeless. The first patent, that was made in 1416 in Venice. The first US patent in 1790 for the production of potash. So agriculture has a deep relationship with intellectual property. But it wasn't until 1996 that via the Pioneer Hybrid Seeds case, this intellectual property stuff started to apply to plants. And so that's an even further layer. And, you know, if you think about it, that's not even a whole generation of people versus the timeless ancestral generations that we have before us that created these amazing things around us, that created like how you make houses and how you make chairs and all of these things. And, you know, the cannabis breeders in ancient Iran and Afghanistan and India and these ancient traders who brought it from place to place, you know, they didn't take it to a new place on the Silk Road and go, here's some seeds. Hey, by the way, if you sell these to anyone else, we're going to come after you. And, you know, no, we had this way of building up society. And so, yeah, this is a return to that ethos and an instillment of those values, those traditional cannabis culture values that we've exemplified, that I love so much about our culture. You know, you like go to these events, hang out with the homies, trade some clones. Like, it's great. It's beautiful. And we do so much better from it. And it contributes to the wellness of the plant. So instilling that in a system that can protect it is, in my opinion, what we need to do if we want it to continue. You know, we need to. And if maybe you are listening and you look inside yourself, you have a moment of awareness now, and you look inside yourself and you go, yeah, this is important. Yeah, sharing does benefit all of us, you know, then yeah, spread the word and get involved and start to create breeding projects for this sort of thing. And, you know, if you're in a jurisdiction where us in the US, it might be hard to do this, we'd love to help assist elsewhere. We'd love to hear from you. Also, there's the Discord if you're more further away from the concept and you just want to contribute like that. There's the GoFundMe. So we have lots of different ways. And if you feel like I do, this isn't just about me, I'm just Caleb, I'm just me, but this is the community that already exists, the sharing that already exists. And if you agree with me that we need to do this, then yeah, let's do this as a community. Let's put into place this ecosystem, and let's, in the organizations that you work in, put this into practice in your own breeding. Start to think about how you can put this into practice. Seed banks, how can you prioritize this sort of sharing mentality and this kind of free, open, and again, free as in freedom, not free beer. So still able to make money, still able to profit, still able to feed our families, but prioritizing that sharing, benefiting all people mentality that's brought our community so far. I really encourage that. And so that's at its core, what this is going to take. It's going to take the whole community, or as many of us as feel within ourselves that this needs to happen, all doing our little pieces and making it happen, and together we're strong, like that bridge that Steve was showing, and together as a community we can walk across that bridge, if we can create this. So the wheels are turning and it's happening. We're very close to formally founding the organization as a not-for-profit in Oregon, and we're starting next week on Monday, bi-weekly, that's every other week, bi-weekly team meetings that you can also join through the Discord, copyleftcannabis.org. And this is the sort of thing that we're just going to continue moving forward slow and steady, and continuing to make sure that it's open, not rushing anything, to make sure that transparency and grassroots can happen, and just moving it forward. So there's going to be lots of opportunities. And yeah, we need you. We need everyone who's listening in your little way contributing towards this. So that's how we make big change.
Yes, for those of you that don't know, the Scythians were the ones that really helped spread cannabis around Asia more than any other culture. They were horsemen, and cannabis was part of their clothing, part of their culture. They found cannabis residue in some of their cups for drinking, as well as smoking implements. So they were smoking it and drinking it, and doing all the fun things, spreading it around Europe long before, or Asia long before everyone else was. So pretty cool.
Yeah, I love that about this plant, brings us together, and it really promotes that sharing. I think that there's something within it, whether you want to say the spirit of it, or, the biochemical signal cascade that comes from imbibing it. It encourages that. It encourages that sharing. And I think that there's so much that has come out of that. If you look at the cannabis community historically, it's just such a beautiful phenomenon. And there's a lot of things it has in common with software, and a lot of things in common with the early computer days. But in a way, it also comes with it this ancient legacy that computers and that other industries don't have. We don't even know all of the societies, all of the groups who carried this around and improved it and benefited it so that we can be benefited from it. And I feel that gratitude, I think that a lot of us feel that when you're sitting down and, you take a nug and you're like, oh yeah, like this is beautiful. And how did it get so beautiful? How did it get all these smells, this complexity? And maybe just like sitting there and observing it and being filled with gratitude, or maybe taking a hit and tasting it, or tasting it in a baked good. And yeah, I get filled with this sense of gratitude that all of these hands, all of this human work so many hours and intentions and love has been put into this plant, and then just the culture that's blossoming out of it is so beautiful and vibrant in so many ways, just like how the flower comes out with its vibrance and with all these subtleties of smells. And it's something to be cared for, you know. We care for our flowers and for our plants with such heart, and we need to care for the community in that same way. There's a lot of like little squabbles here and there that happen, but I think it's the togetherness and the sharing, you know. Share a joint, share a conversation, share some advice about how to grow the plant or a new observation. And that's what it's all about, you know. It brings us back from those little issues, just like this plant can bring us back and ground us again. And so yeah, I think that's really powerful, and I'm so grateful for everyone who had a hand in creating this complexity, you know, Mother Nature to begin with, and who knows how many hands, who knows how many people, how many generations have worked on this plant. uh, and it's our honor and our responsibility to care for it too, you know, and care for it in this new landscape. It's not just how do we find a good spot in the Himalayas where we can have our patch, you know, and defend it from maybe neighbors or from maybe some other government or something, you know, like some ancestors have. Um,
Speak for yourself. Sign me up for the Himalayan compound.
right? Well, I think we include that, and I like that. You know, we have the preservation library happening in the Himalayas actually, that Arazin is doing, and I think that it goes beyond that. You know, it's we've built. It's finding the patch, and it's finding the cultivars, and it's finding the inputs, and it's finding the style, the skills. You know, we've built so much, all of the love and passion, all of the devotion of you know, people like me and people like you and people like the listeners, and you know, especially the people that braved life-threatening conditions and threats of imprisonment, uh, and you know, people that came across continents in ancient times with this. So yeah, it's just really, I just feel so much gratitude about it. And just like we would put some IPM spray as a preventative on our gardens, for example, especially if we're thinking, oh, like this upcoming is the time of season that we're going to have a certain type of pest, you know, you might anticipate it with some preventative. I think that's what this copyleft thing is really. We're at this time where, yeah, our plants aren't all eaten up and destroyed, but any farmer who's been doing this for a little bit knows that's when you don't see the issues is when you start to prepare, you start to prevent, and you know, so. And we're seeing a little bit. I mean, like in my mind, the Wrigley lawsuit and you know the recent lawsuit about extraction technologies, these stand out as, oh, okay, some of our neighbor plants have some speckles on them, you know, they have a little bit of some signs of pest that we might need to be proactive towards. And then you look at the neighbor field, corn, for example, and the corn industry has just been obliterated by this type of problem, this pathogen or pest, so to speak. And I'm speaking of, you know, predatory litigation.
A lot of those pests are because they're growing in sterile fields. If they actually had living soil, a lot of this stuff would. Septoria is a great example of one that would ravage this corn sometimes. And you know, if you got all you got to do is fix the soil. It's funny, like how you know their movement towards this corporatized patent every single last aspect has caused them to be more susceptible to disease, which I think is funny.
Yeah. Oh, you hit that right on the head, and I love that. I think that carries totally into it as well. Like we got to fix the soil. You know, we got to work on making sure to have the capacity and the vibrance, the microbial life, you know, within our community to be resilient to those issues. Yeah. There's a great documentary, if no one, or if anyone out there hasn't seen it, you should totally check it out. Micro documentary, so it's not too long. It's called Seeding Fear, and it's by Neil Young. Actually, he was the producer. It's about some of these things that happened in corn, and about how even some of the farmers that fought tooth and nail in court against the claims by Monsanto, the IP related claims, which had no evidence, no material evidence behind them in many cases, that some of these farmers, even when they won, had lost their farms, had lost their livelihood, and many of them, died in poverty conditions. And it's really actually quite sad. And that sort of thing, it motivates me to be proactive. Yeah, it's a lot like seeing the cornfield next door obliterated by Septoria and just thinking, oh man, we better go around and check every little bit of this field and make sure that we're ready, And yeah, it's not just one of us out here doing this, it's almost like we are the microbial community. We are the soil, so to speak, here for the community, and we have to prepare ourselves. We have to create systems. And I know some people have tried to make these systems in the past, but when we have a system that works, that's the whole thing about thinking pragmatically. When we have a system that works, it's just going to click. Conflicts of interest and things like that won't arise because it'll be built properly. And so maybe some people that have followed the last 6 months popped up here and there, talked about this idea, asked a lot of people about this idea, and you might be wondering, oh, why is it not a nonprofit today? It's we have to put this together very mindfully, and that's part of how we avoid the pitfalls that other groups may have fallen into. Is we just be transparent. We create it, and we create it in a way where those pitfalls just won't naturally arise. Right? Just like when you create a good living soil, you don't necessarily have to figure out every little element of it, but if you construct the fundamentals so that it fits, then a lot of it can self-correct, And so, yeah, luckily, nonprofit structure is great for that. I would be distrustful of any for-profit group involved in this sphere because, for-profit involves taking a development and making money from it, taking a thing that would otherwise potentially be free or would not exist and then making money from it. And we all got to feed our families and take care of ourselves, and for the community good, if we're looking to take care of the community, then yeah, a nonprofit is what we need. So we don't have a nonprofit out there yet, but I do feel like that is what's needed. And that's what's filled this gap in other industries too, with software, with the open source seed initiative for food crops. So it is, again, a tried and true method. Really trying not to invent the wheel here. I think this is all, it's complicated and it takes a bit to wrap your head around, but luckily it's not totally new. In fact, it's pretty well established in a lot of other areas. And the game that they're trying to play, they being the large corporate players in this, is to prepare for this on their side. They're getting together lawyers, I'm sure, and they're getting together their plans for IP litigations and different patents. And we're already seeing, some very broad patents just being tossed out there so that maybe they can be a basis for litigation later. And, all these little preparations on that side. But that's because they know that if they let it out of the bag too early, then we might assemble something like this. We might bind together and create that bundle of sticks before they can start breaking individual sticks. So that's why there's that quietness, But I think that people that have experience in the software world or other parts of agriculture, other places where IP has been very big, uh, will see this too. You know, a lot of them do. A lot of people are already trying to work on solutions towards this because they also see it. Uh, there, as soon as there is an established route in the court system to enforce on cannabis businesses, this sort of intellectual property thing, and just like any established sector, it'll swing through and the gates will open and they'll suddenly be incredibly prepared. It'll be astonishing. This is my prediction. It'll be astonishing how well prepared these large scale businesses are to jump in and, very creatively privatize and take over the cannabis space. I just don't have the heart to watch that happen. I just don't have the heart to sit on the side and grow my plants and watch this beautiful ecosystem be carved up. So yeah, that's there's so much potential. You know, this is like it's a golden era for cannabis. You may not feel like it sometimes, again, with like little squabbles, Instagram squabbles or whatnot, but really we live in a golden era for cannabis and for the diversity of the plant. And that's something to carry forward and continue to make it a golden era for the future generations.
Awesome. So what do people need if they want to try and what do they need to do if they want to put their cultivar into copyleft? What do they need to do?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The process, as we've figured it out thus far, you would take a breeding project, and luckily in cannabis, these great breeders of the past have put out public domain works. So we can take just about any variety that you're working on, right? And then as soon as a breeder produces seeds, and those seeds, then some of them are germinated, let's say, that is when the genetic code is being functioned. It's already an established code. It's been written, right? So all we need then is for it to be readable, right? Because as we said in the past, copyright just needs it to be an artistic work that's been written and is readable in documented form. So then when that grows out, a sample can be sent to one of our allied genetic test places, one of the labs that can test the genetics and get us genome sequencing. And then the genome sequence is published. And the publishing of the genome sequence happens at the same time as the copyleft license is initiated with the breeder. The copyleft license, again, Strainly, put it all together. We may do some very minor changes, but we, of course, make it very public and open and available and all aligned with the ethos of it. But you can actually find this on Strainly's website. I believe it's Open Source Breeding Part 2. And that agreement is executed by the breeder as the genetics are published. At that point, the breeder just has to put a little sticker that has a very short summary of the copyleft principles, essentially saying, in order to value your rights and the rights of others, we have to make sure that no one forces you to let go of your rights and that you aren't forcing anyone else to let go of their rights. It's the gist of it. And then that goes on seed packs and seed listings as it's sold. So as usual, as is the norm, the breeders can produce their seeds, they can go to seed banks, or they can be released in the typical manners. And then also this can go with clones, the same thing. This makes it possible for us to do a number of different things down the road, like authenticity, genetic authenticity certifications. I'm really excited about that because then we can say, oh yes, this is actually this strain. You're actually getting the right thing because we tested the sample and it matched our published sequence. And so here you get the stamp of authenticity. And so that type of function just flows right into the protection. So yeah, as soon as they've gotten these seeds out into the world with these stickers on them or label, then they're protected. They're considered protected. And if there's any issues with future attempts to patent that work or privatize it, if there's attempts to litigate against the breeder in a predatory manner or attack cultivators that are using that varietal, then the nonprofit can protect it. So it's a really straightforward thing for breeders. Again, it's just you breed it, you work with one of our allies to get it sequenced, you sign the agreement, we publish the sequence, and then you include the sticker with your distributions. And then if someone gets a hold of those seeds, they want to do their own breeding project, then of course they would have needed to get the seeds from you, so maybe pay you or whatever agreement you have with them, and then they can use those seeds to produce more seeds, so their own varietals, let's say, and then they in that development of a new strain, in using a copyleft strain, are producing then a copyleft strain. So the new strains that they produce then from copyleft strains are then included within the copyleft system. So it just follows like that and becomes a bit viral, which is pretty awesome. And that doesn't necessarily take expense on people down the line while still offering that protection. It's actually pretty awesome and pretty easy for the breeders. We'd like to do it free of cost. That is the goal we are working towards. However, offering full genetic sequencing to get the whole genome is a bit pricey at the current time. So we're working with different groups to try to get that established, figure out maybe some bulk and nonprofit deals that we can work at and that sort of thing. But that would be that, and basic administration to do the filings would be all the costs involved, maybe $200 or $300 versus what can be thousands and thousands of dollars for patents.
Very cool. I'm going to do a quick break here in the middle and plug my speaking event next weekend. So I'll be speaking at the Lucky Leaf Expo on May 15th. If you are in Austin, Texas, and you want to come talk aquaponic cannabis, I will be on both the cultivation panel as well as giving my own hour-long seminar on aquaponics and then a little bit on edible CBD at the end. So it'll be a really cool presentation. If you don't make this one, I will also be speaking at all the other ones that they're doing, which is, let me pull the schedule up here. Austin, May 14th and 15th, Dallas, 9th and 10th, Oklahoma City, September 3rd and 4th, Jacksonville, Mississippi, October 8th and 9th, Houston, Texas, November 5th and 6th, and Albuquerque, New Mexico, on February 25th and 26th. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And yeah, we'll see you guys there.
It does sound like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's going to be fun talking cultivation in the South. There aren't a lot of people that have done big scale Southern operations, and it's a big difference from the West Coast. Big difference. And the diseases we get, the insects we get, there's a lot of stuff that we're, the first year Oklahoma legalized, they had heavy rains, and I don't know if I visited a single outdoor farm that didn't have at least one plant with septoria. People didn't even know what septoria was until the plants were ravaged. It was way too late on some of the farms that I visited to do anything about. But, it's just, and I'm sure we're going to go through this again when we go to the East Coast. I'm sure we're going to have new diseases and insects that we didn't see at scale. you know, I'm growing in Georgia this year with a client, and you know, I definitely expect to see some insects I haven't seen before in that greenhouse at some point. You know what I mean? Just because it is a very different climate than everywhere else I've grown so far. So it's kind of fun and interesting, and I think that too with viroids, you know, you see leaf curly top virus transferring, and that wasn't something anyone had talked about 5 years ago, you know, hop latent virus with and all the others that can be transferred by whitefly and all these others that, you know, shit, 5-10 years ago no one even spoke about or knew they existed, right? So we knew that plants did weird things sometimes for weird reasons, but we didn't really have an attributed way. We didn't even have access to the technology to quantify it, right? So I think that also, like, utilizing this genetic pool, you know, I would love to see this gene pool also be used for things like fleshing out you know, potential genetic diseases that are being passed on through the seed lines, because there's very clearly viroids that are heavily documented now, HPLV being one of them.
Yeah, I think that's super important, and that's something I think this sort of databasing will be a huge opportunity for. I'm actually talking with Matthew Gates, or Zenthanol as he's known commonly, and he's awesome. He's pretty involved in this copyleft project, and so shout out to him. And we've been talking about integrating into this pathogen tracking and also susceptibility tracking, having access to large scale genetics databases, and having that publicly available means any jurisdiction in the world, scientists can work on this. It's not just jurisdictions where they can get the plant and test it. No, we can make this in bulk available. So if a scientist in Japan wants to look at powdery mildew infection rates that were co-reported into our samples with the genetic corpus that we have, and they want to use 10,000 samples, ideally we build this to the point where that can happen, and then we all benefit as a community, because then these scientists who are also working for the common good in these universities and in their pursuit of science, that they can share this with us and make this available, and we all benefit from it. So I think there's huge potential for that. And then being a nonprofit, we'd really like to allow the benefits of the nonprofit, you know, tax write-off ability and that type of thing for getting testing and looking at the pathogen testing and susceptibility testing. Because imagine if you're in a cultivation setting or a breeding setting and you have plants which are struggling with a certain pathogen repeatedly, being able to say, well, this is great, I chose copylefted varieties, and we can tax write off our testing for the pathogen so that we can put that data in for the public good through copyleft. You know, that sort of thing has not been available for our community, and it's pretty mind-blowing when I talk to people in the community about it. But yeah, having these things available in mass, and then being able to say, well, if it benefits us all, that's what nonprofits are for. You get tax write-off, you know, especially upon federal legalization, when all the big scale cultivators can actually do tax write-offs, could be a game changer in terms of gathering and funding the gathering of this information, making it available for the community, and preempting issues, you know. So if we get the data in there and we can predict, oh, this new viroid is spreading along these types of cultivars, that can serve the community also in preempting it, or in designing cures for it, designing preventatives for it, or quarantining to prevent the spread, just because we have the knowledge, we have the diagnostic knowledge and the organization.
For those of you that don't know, you can get hop latent viroid testing through Medicinal Genomics, as well as I think AgDia also has a test now for it. Memory serves me right, but the Medicinal Genomics one tests it for hop latent viroid, lettuce chlorosis viroid, and cannabis cryptic virus. So, you know, in my opinion, they got the better test. You know, kind of covering your bases a little more broadly than you would just going with a singular test. So, definitely a cool thing. Again, if you're really interested in learning more about this, getting into buying your own testing equipment and stuff like this through your, medicinal genomics is who I personally recommend. If you really want to build your own lab, it's not that expensive. Now you're looking around $4,000, all said and done. Maybe 12 or 14 if you really want to get into it. But for an entry level one, man, you're not even talking that much. It's not that much money to start doing some of the stuff yourself. I mean, just the thermal cycler isn't that much, but you're looking around $1,200 to $1,400 worth of equipment, to get everything right and everything you need for your whole kit. But it's a pretty good, simple little system that you can get, and then you can buy all your assays and everything through medicinal genomics. They have access to all different types of cool testing and stuff like that, or even have your stuff tested. I know I send occasionally really screwed up looking plants that I think have viroids to them. Often they do, sometimes they don't, sometimes they don't know. It's fun, but it's definitely a cool thing that you can do. And, it helps the pool of data, because Kevin McKernan over there has been on the show, and he's all about, getting rid of bad information and moving things forward. And they have their own, there's the phyllo tree from Cannapedia. And you can kind of see the different strains and all that stuff. And I think they have a galaxy too somewhere that you can fly through like the other idiots. But anyways, they're really the kind of the better, in my opinion, much better suppository of genetic data. They do have a lot of really interesting strains. They do quite a bit of, I'm just going to pull this right now. Let me see if I can find one that's not password protected, but you can password protect or publicly publish your stuff. So I think this one is, there you go. So this one's public. You can see the level of data that they have on it there. And then, different things as far as genetic similarity, genetic distance. It's a really cool thing. So definitely a cool project to check out, and a great resource if you are trying to protect your stuff one way or another. Medicinal genomics is a good one. You can also submit it and then password protect it, and if you want to hold on to it for a while, it is what it is. But here's just a random plant that Kevin submitted, or was submitted by Kevin, I guess. You can see the different ratios of different genetics and different things. It's just interesting, the different possible synthase, and just the level of data they have is much, much better than any of the other people out there that offer the service. So
yeah, this is a great
definitely
system.
the ones that we recommend for sure.
Yeah, I mentioned Cannapedia earlier, and yeah, that's a great system. I love their open approach, where they're willing to host information for a variety of IP configurations. So they don't require you to submit to any given approach or ideology. They will support it all. And Kevin is sorry, I mute there for a moment. Yeah, Kevin's great, and I really support their project there with Cannapedia and getting all that information out there. Feel really deeply aligned with what they're doing over there, and I think it connects in. This is the kind of ecosystem I was talking about, where we need lots of organizations that can click together, fit together, and support with this web of public information, and really bring this to the public. I don't think that most people in the cannabis community realize how much of a game changer it's going to be if we can make, as a community, if we can make massive amounts of information about cannabis genetics, pathogens, and cultivation of those specific genetics. So pheno and genotype specific cultivation understandings and chemotype testing. If all of that can be integrated together, there's probably some additional elements that can be worked into that. If that in mass for tons and tons of strains can be put out there to the public, the amount of capability that opens up for a community is astounding, is truly astounding. We have small groups here and there doing genetic testing, doing pathogen testing, using marker-assisted breeding, doing pathogen susceptibility research, and they're just in small little silos, and they're already producing pretty substantial results. So if we just imagine the exponential jump in results and in progress that we can have by creating this on a mass scale, it's really powerful. And I think that we have the imperative to make that happen instead of getting that caught up in the citadels. I use the example from free software, that bazaars instead of citadels. We have an awesome bazaar going on, and it's about to get even awesomer.
So let's talk about, so say someone has a really good cultivar they've been growing for a long time. There's a lot of people out west or in even other parts of the country that have a cultivar their family's been growing for generations. Why would they consider putting it into something like this?
Yeah, so it's important to distinguish. There's 3 categories. There's unreleased strains, strains that haven't been released and thus don't have any sort of rights attached to them necessarily. They don't have any sort of obligations. And that may have been shared with a small group, a family, maybe a small group of friends, testers, that sort of thing. And that's still considered that. Then there's public domain, which is if something has been released, like publicly, and it is available, or a wider crowd, and that then is presumed to just be open to the public. It's there, and no rights are presumed about that, but no rights can be presumed about that. So if it's been released into the public domain, we can't protect it. We really encourage you to get the genetic data, to put it on Cannapedia or another system, make it publicly available. We really encourage that. We'd like to help make that possible also. And then there's the third category, which is copyleft or some sort of open source protection. And if it hasn't been released yet, the first category, it's tested or it's been within closed circles, small groups, communities, then it can be put into the copyleft system. And that's going to protect people because not only does it prevent them from having issues where maybe they could have corporate raiding or predatory litigation, and this would, having their strain be copylefted, would allow the nonprofit to intervene on their behalf, and on behalf of the strain rather, and then to deter the litigation and free up that small mom and pop operation, which I know from my personal experience being an individual at the brunt end of large-scale corporate wealth in litigation, it can be pretty traumatic. And so preventing that trauma is a really big bonus to this. Also, they know that if a cut of that gets out or some seeds get out, and then someone patents it, again, that can't be turned back around and sue them for having a plant that's too closely related to a corporate patent or something. And also they know that it can't be locked down like that. If it does get out, it's not going to just be pirated. That's what we call piracy of the genetics. If someone comes and they take some of the genetics and then you privatize it, they privatize it for their benefit, that is a form of piracy. And so that's prevented with the copyleft system. And then also the mom and pop operation, small scale growers or family operation might feel in their hearts, that this plant has been worked on through generations, and that yes, they've done their bits to improve it, but they want to offer it and continue, just like all of the ancestors who held that plant, who then passed it forward, right? That they want to make that available. and they can make it available now in a greater way even than just releasing it. So they can actually release it in a way where the genetics are made available, where it's able to contribute to the advancement of our understanding of the plant, and where it's made available for the community, the wider community as a whole, upcoming breeders if they choose to release it. But they can also just release the genetic data and have these protections and then not release the seeds, not release cuts. That's also fine. They can sell the cuts, sell the seeds, however they choose. And that still carries with it the protections, the copyleft protections. So I think that's several reasons there, 4 or 5, why a small mom and pop operation may want to, or multi-generational family growers may want to register into the system and get this protection on their varietals, even if they don't want to release it. Another group that I want to touch on here is preservationists, and groups that are preserving strains, maybe 1 or 2 derivations away from land races, or who are in touch with groups that have like family bred varieties in indigenous communities or indigenous locations, that this can be a means to also prevent that type of piracy and prevent the taking of those genetics and the later privatization of those, or the piracy and then suit of those people. And it can also preserve the genetics in the public good.
My question is, how does that work in the real world though? Like, how do you make sure that like that area is protected and not just like the governor or the president or El Presidente?
Yeah, well, that's valid. And I think that if we decentralize it from any one individual, that's how we protect it. This is built to work hand in hand with things like appellation systems and farmer solidarity breeding networks. This can work hand in hand with those, so that instead of one person having their name on an application or a name on a patent, this helps to protect it as a community good. And so if we know that the community good comes from, this certain community here, then it's given that credit, and it's given that kind of appellation status when it's registered, because it's all in that registration. It's all in the license, in the copyleft license application, where it's come from in the community and the history, and those genetics get put up publicly. It's like, these are the genetics of these people. And it's not necessarily that you would be able to just go get their seeds, but you would know that if these genetics popped up somewhere else, so they probably came from those people, so there's various levels of protection that it can offer depending on where people are or what they're trying to do.
So how does this compare to, say, like cultivar protections or like herbarium work and stuff like that? Because there's a lot of stuff that's done around flowers and things like that in that regard. How does this compare to that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so UPOV is the International Plant Varietal Protection System, and there's international agreements about plant varietal protections and plant varietal rights. That's been interpreted by different countries in different ways. And in the United States, that's been interpreted as a USDA system where you could have a varietal that's stabilized. So in the cannabis community, we think of that as an IBL, and typically F5 or further, depending on the variety or the strain or the plant that you're working on. But essentially, you need to have incredible uniformity. And so it needs to be unique and uniform and distinct. And there's a whole nother classification. So like I was saying in the beginning, there's patent law, and there's trademark law, and those are interconnected. And then there's this international plant varietal laws and their implementation in the United States. That's also a separate system. So once federal legalization happens, or presently with cannabis varietals that are not THC, that those can be submitted to the USDA, and the USDA will run tests. Now, it costs quite a bit to have them run those uniformity tests, but then you have that whole set of protections. And in my opinion, those protections are not as resolutely defendable as a lot of the protections of other angles, mainly because you have that one uniform work that you've created for that whole time, and then you've made it so that it doesn't derivate, and it just has standardization, and then that standardization can be taken and derivated from and made into a new thing. And so then that could be privatized. So it really doesn't have a lot of the same protections. It's really for if you develop, say, an ornamental flower that is the first purple type of a specific flower that's normally yellow, and every one of the seeds that you germinate of your type comes out purple like that, and there's a big economic value for the purple flowers of that type, and so you could register with the USDA and get that plant varietal protection right, and then have that be protected. But with cannabis, that just doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, for one, there's not a lot of people that are bringing their creations all the way to an inbred line and having extreme uniformity. And then by the time that someone does that and then goes through the USDA process, pays them to do that whole testing and uniformity assurance, then taking that and saying, that uniform feature is so unique and so economically valuable that I can take that into the market and actually say, like, I'm the only one with this, and if you get it, then you have to answer to my rights. Well, someone tomorrow just comes up with a slightly different strain that's from a totally different genetic line, but it supplants that place in the market. The USDA route is just has put you in the hole at that point, right? You've done all of this work to be supplanted by a fast mover. Versus with patents, it is a little bit more flexible, where patents actually allow you to register. There's some limited chemovar protection, right? But there's also like single genetic sequence protection, and that can allow you to have a cut that is highly valuable and that gets passed on. And derivations from that cut or that work can also be pursued with the patent. And then even more broad is this copyright system that copyleft is built from. And that includes, just simply through the nature of this licensing agreement, it includes when you pass on the seeds, that use of those seeds in the future with information, with the sticker, is agreement to the terms again. So it just follows, and it follows. And if you make new seeds under that, you make a new strain, you don't need to establish an inbred line. You don't need to establish incredible uniformity. It's just the moment that the artistic work is created and then readable. So create a new seed line with a copyleft strain, and then you have those rights as soon as there's the genetic sequence. And that is very nimble. So I think when we're thinking pragmatically and how do we as a community work with the system, get it to work well for us, that is, we want to look at how nimble the system is, right? The USDA system is very unnimble. It's very slow. The patent system is moderately nimble, and I think that the copyright system, and it's the reason it's used for music, uniformly music is under copyright system, and it's not because they wouldn't let them do it any other way. It's just because the nimbleness of copyright makes it outperform other alternatives. And to get a privatized copyright is complicated. in order to get it publicly known and defendable, you might look at groups that can do that on a large scale and see them do it, but you don't really see small mom and pop operations doing privatized copyright. And that's where then again, having the nonprofit, it's you don't have to create a whole organization or a whole license for yourself. That's the why if just a group of us come together as a community, as we are here, and we create a nonprofit, it just does all of that work for the people. So again, very nimble, right? It's you don't have to go make a whole nonprofit for yourself each time you want to do this. You don't have to make a whole new business or a whole new reservation of rights. You can just continue that progress, connect your work into the copyleft system that's already going to be built, and they're available for you. And then boom, there it is. Like, get it tested, do the agreements, pass it on with the label, boom, boom, boom. And that's a lot easier. So if people want to go the USDA route, they could. And if people want to go the patent route, they could. And I really think that this route is the most pragmatic, the most nimble, and one where we can all benefit together, one where we build one system. It's not a ton of different companies building a ton of different systems. It's just one easy system, and then victories in defending that one place will carry on and help us defend it in other places. We may be able to get grants with this system by having a nonprofit and undertaking research, making this information and this genomics information available. Grants are a great opportunity there. We also are looking at continually having fundraising and donations. And then historically, the free software movement has actually won judgments against violators and against groups that have tried to come in and corporate raid open source companies and that type of thing. And they've actually gotten money judgments that have kept them afloat. So the Free Software Foundation has actually been funded largely off of its victories in enforcing the community good. So once the ball is rolling, it's the sort of thing that it can perpetually keep building, keep snowballing, building momentum, building force. And then each step of the way, it gets more valuable for the people that are already in it and the people that want to join. And I think that's really empowering. I think that's, you touched on in the beginning of the show, it's a lot of doom and gloom talk. And it's empowering to think about this system that, we put in the work now and it gets going and it just gets better. We get more genetics involved. We get more pathogen testing involved. We get more breeders involved, more talent, more ideas, and more genetics. And it just keeps building. And then victories in defending this and in protecting the breeders and cultivators, that gets put into the system as a further level of defense, as a further protection. And so I think that's super empowering to think that we, as just small growers, breeders, cultivators, if you're running an organization or you're just growing for your own medical need, that we can all just come together and play a small role and create something that then continues to serve all little people like this, continues to serve the community and the businesses that evolve out of it. And just like with software, then can offer those that are really successful in the community, either from a grassroots or from a corporate perspective, it can offer great resources for that. It doesn't have to be closed door to anything, to any group. It can be an interconnected ecosystem that says, hey, I know like big money is going to come in. We all know big money is coming in. And instead of setting up to fight it, we go, jujitsu or Aikido style or Tai Chi style, how do we move this energy to work for the system? And so, yeah, having a system in place when that energy moves in fiercely and it goes, oh, you know, we really don't want to fight these community members bonding together. We really don't want to fight against all of this well-made copyleft system. We want to build it. You know, there's actually some cool stuff there, and if we work with it, then we don't have to spend a bunch of money to fight it, you know. And then they inherently contribute, and their innovations don't get siloed away. So the small mom and pop or generational growers that you mentioned before, as small scale breeders or old school breeders, can also benefit from the large scale established groups, their progress, their research, their breeding, their testing. If it's through the copyleft system and they're benefiting from all of us, we can also benefit from them. It can be made available to all of us. And that's something that we can all look forward to. You know, that's something that it'd be great to know, not just, oh, this strain is supposedly powdery mildew resistant, you know, instead knowing, well, this strain was bred for powdery mildew resistance, and then it was taken up by this mega corporate facility that tested it and tested it and tested it and tested it and verified, and then you know, that information was just folded back in, and now you know, like, yeah, well, this is the incredibly well vetted powdery mildew resistant strain. That's just, you know, the start of it. I might get a little bit heady or a little bit geek out for some people, but this can go really far. I mean, this can go to some pretty sci-fi concepts. So here's one. There's the process that genetic code is read into an organism, right? How do I get my hand or a leaf out of a genetic code? It's a process of protein folding. So these proteins are produced from the DNA, and this folding occurs, and then reactions occur, and essentially the structure. So then you have a leaf or a finger. Well, they have figured out through certain systems, and at Google, most notably AlphaFold 2 has figured out how this protein folding can be predicted. So we can look at, say, a genetic basing and coding, and we can look at protein availability or building block availability, and we can predict how then the structures are going to come off the DNA and react and structure. Then the next step is just seeing how those fit together to create the organism, to create the finger or the leaf. And so if we have a big database of these genetic sequences, and we can use systems like AlphaFold 2, or likely future even better systems, AlphaFold 3, 4, or other alternatives, we can link those together and predict the proteins, the chemicals that will come off of that DNA, and the organism structures, the structures of the living beings that will be produced. And so if we have, let's say, a pathogen, which we know is deterred by a specific compound in some cannabis varietals, that compound is produced through a certain folding of protein. We can use the program to say, oh, well, here is the genetic sequence that's needed to produce the proteins that make the chemical that fight the pathogen. And so we run the database, we look, oh, here is 27 varieties that have this genetic sequence. And we know that predictively, they will produce the pathogen deterring chemicals. We didn't need to go in and test each of those individual ones. Maybe they even come from somewhere else in the world, but we were able to look, and then we say, oh, well, 3 of those show this other gene set that shows a resistance to heat stress, and I'm growing in an area where heat stress is important. So you say, oh, well, that's great. The nexus of that is there's that pathogen resistance chemical production and the heat stress tolerance gene, and you're like, oh, well, here's the 3. And then you go, well, okay, but one of those actually produces the chemovar ratios that I want. And so there you go. You were able to choose a strain with a lot higher precision of what your results are going to be and dealing with the situations preemptively in your area than you could at all in the present time. I mean, we have no way to do that right now. So best we could do is if someone has done some research on basic genetic back tracing from chemicals to proteins to the genetics, and then found a genome, and then someone else says, oh, well, I have this cannabis variety and I tested it and it matches that, and those information pieces have to find themselves in this wide open universe of information, that if those even happen to be tested separately and then come together, then we have 1, versus the 27 examples I had before. Then you have to do the next layer to find the next one, matrix that, right? See, we just don't have the ability to do that at the same level now. But that's the possibilities that these projects have, is crowdsourced data for genetics. If we can create this data bank, and then we have people that have the strains in various areas doing research and doing work on it, the synergy of that is amazing. For example, there's situations that arise, innovations that cross-apply we could never predict. Recently, they found that a scanning AI system for pictures was supposed to identify pastries, and identified which pastry was which and which bread was which super well. That was mostly entirely applicable to scanning to find certain types of cancer cells and identifying those cancer cells. And it has now been a life-saving technology that's super powerful. And that never would have been possible if that bread scanning software hadn't been made available. So you think about that type of synergy, like no one could have predicted that. That's a level of synergy that is beyond what a corporation could organize, could manufacture. It's the type of synergy that comes from a community that is diverse and with many people acting in it, but sharing of information and resource within. So yeah, I can look at this and we can geek about how we can predict the genetics and then design what cultivar we want, and then go look and find those genetics and then selectively breed for our dream cultivar, and use this corpus for that. And that's amazing. And then I can't even predict, I can't even begin to imagine these higher level synergies, these like bread scanning machine becomes tumor scanning life-saving machine level synergy that can happen. But we're going to see that with cannabis. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to see that impaired by paywalls? Do we want to see that impaired by silos and locked into citadels? Or do we want to see the bazaar where we're all handing it around, and then, oh my gosh, this amazing thing happened, handing it around, and wow, I can't believe you came up with that. That saves my wife's life. Or, we create these synergies, and the interactions of people, it's miraculous, it's amazing. And time again throughout history, these unexpected combinations of ideas, these unexpected intersections of realities from different people's lives have produced the most amazing things, have produced the internet, have produced new languages, have produced, I mean, probably produced a lot of the plants that we know and love. So yeah, it's just the power of carrying that forward is, I think we can all really feel it within ourselves, you know?
Sorry, juggling too many things at once.
Oh, you're good. Yeah, I think that that we feel it within ourselves, but we can't see it all the way yet, you know? We feel all this potential. We feel the crest of the wave that we're on with all of this technology becoming available, with all of the predictive breeding becoming available, and all of our ability to analyze and test and have designer chemovars and have, you know, these high fidelity fast breeding projects and marker assisted breeding. And, you know, as I was mentioning, AlphaFold 2, there's all of these things and they're just bubbling up and they're starting to become possible. I think we can feel just, wow, that's amazing. Wow, this is happening. And we can't imagine the synergies of all these things if they're all hooked up in an ecosystem that allows them to connect all with each other, you know? If they're in a way where their orientation in this ecosystem allows these synergies, these exponentially more impressive ideas to unfold, these overlaps of new concepts that create the truly brilliant concepts, you know? Any truly powerful trend that is culminated and brought forward to the next level of evolution with an innovation, that is like the overlap of various niches, the overlap of trends and subjects. And we have just so many that are so promising right now in the cannabis world and in plant breeding in general. So the ability to interconnect them all is empowering and humbling, and to me really mind-blowing, really something that I'm looking forward to in 15 years, 20 years. What will the cannabis sphere look like? What will our ability to breed and create the plants that we envision and create new plants that do things that we haven't yet envisioned, you know? What's that going to look like? I don't know, but I think it's going to be incredibly influenced by this type of project. It's going to be incredibly influenced by what we choose to do with the information, how we choose to interconnect it. Hey, Fumidor, how's it going? Welcome.
Cheers, SolShine. Cheers, Bowden. What's going on, dudes?
Hey, we were just talking about patents. Actually, mate, you're a great time to chime in here. Why don't you tell us about, you know, what your thoughts are? You have a really awesome cultivar Morgana that you put a lot of work on, and you do a lot of other breeding and things like that. What are your thoughts on cannabis patents? And I know you've heard him talk about copyleft before, and kind of the, you know, trying to work on protections for breeders. What are your opinions as a breeder who really, you know, does it at a much bigger scale than certainly I do?
Well, I don't know about bigger scale, but that's, I guess, the future. I hope, anyway. I hope it'll do well. And I guess I'm always thinking about kind of, even with my grow, even though the grow might be a small grow or a big grow or anything else, I'm always kind of thinking, what if, you know? So like with the breeding, I think, what if I put any amount of work into something, I want it to kind of be worth something at the end. I think that's usually a pretty natural thing. So how do I put this? Even if it were small scale Morgana, I still don't want to get ripped off. It's big scale Morgana, small scale Morgana. I still want to feel like I, you know, did my work and it amounted to something. You know what I mean? Like when you do any work, you want to feel like you didn't get ripped off for it. So like it is on my mind, like what happens if someone up the chain in Morgana's past, like something that Subcool got or something. Maybe someone seizes something from there, the Jack the Ripper, the Space Queen, and somehow weaponizes that basically by patenting some specific chemovar in there or something, and basically locking it up in such a way that it becomes difficult for me to kind of get away with using those genetics. Like, I don't know if that's going to happen, but people are always kind of paranoid about that kind of stuff. Like, oh, what if they patent something down the line, and maybe that doesn't even hold up in court, but it will create a chain of lawsuits as they, for example, sue all the small-time breeders, and the small-time breeders will just settle. You know what I mean? A lot of times, Monster Cable was going around basically suing people with the name Monster in their business. And a lot of times these businesses had every right to have the name Monster in their business. They were Monster something else in Wichita Falls or something, right? And Monster Cable comes along and basically just kind of sues them for that fucking name. Bigger entities could probably fight back, but smaller entities were like, dude, we're barely keeping the lights on, and Kimmy needs to go to college, and whatever the freaking hilarious story is, and they just basically pay the settlement and change their name. And so, like, that kind of stuff is on my mind, that someone will patent, or someone will come along and patent Morgana. I'll be like, dude, that's a name from King Arthur. It's been around for hundreds of fucking years, da 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 da. But someone might come along and patent it, or try to anyway, and maybe it won't hold up in court, but I'll have to litigate it or fight it basically long enough that I go under or something. So I don't know. I am kind of, SolShine was on my show. I am very kind of cognizant of, or at least paying attention to that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? I'm very supportive of stuff that SolShine is doing. I guess I'll just finish this up by saying, like, I feel like the more we open source a lot of this stuff, the more we ensure that it'll go forward. Anyway, hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, thanks, Fumi. I think that there's a lot of people that mirror that same concern. And I think that's a lot of what this is coming out of. This movement is birthing, now solutions, and yeah, it comes out of that concern. Like, what could the big players do? Can the small breeders even weather an attack? Like, oh, can we win? That's not the question. Like you said, could we even weather it? Yeah.
That's it, because like I say, how do I put this? Maybe you will eventually prevail. Maybe the law prevents them from patenting your entire line. Maybe it'll be frivolous, like, what the fuck, you patented Space Queen that was created 20 years ago or something, but even still, it'll lock shit up for maybe 20 years or something. Like, I heard that, well, I guess it's not important, but any number of different lawsuits will get tied up, like the McDonald's chick with the coffee and whatever, that was tied up in appeals and appeals and appeals for 20 years. Now, granted, that's something different, but how do I put this? Like, a bigger entity can simply throw lawyers at a smaller entity. You know what I mean? They don't necessarily have to have a case. They can just keep appealing things on some level, or in different jurisdictions or whatever else. I'm worried that silly stuff will strangle small entities. You know what I mean? And I don't, how do I put this? Like, if you don't care about that on some level, you're like, oh, I don't care about small breeders, but you do on some level probably care about, like, good coffee or good food or good bread or good, whatever. And most of the time when you think about that, that stuff comes from smaller producers. The smaller producers can afford to kind of be specific and weird and quirky. And so they'll make that bread that you like, you know what I mean? Whereas Safeway or somebody, they just make whatever the fuck, I think we should all pay attention to this kind of stuff, I don't know, I'm rambling about it, but it pays to think about it.
Yeah, so I had something that I wanted to bring up, just kind of and something I think is another layer that's going to end up ultimately being on top of this whole weird crazy cake is I think we're going to end up realizing that, and this is just based on my, again, prefacing this is based on my own data. So, shred me if you want on that. But I think that you're going to end up seeing certain terpenes that are triggered by very specific microbes. And if you don't have that microbe present, it's not going to trigger the gene to make the production happen. So I think that you're going to end up seeing people maybe even patenting microbe replication, or like I could see that the microbes or saying this cultivar with this microbe set being a utility patent or some kind of other those being layered together to be a patent for defense, I think is going to be something in the future that will be, a problem, I guess if you want to call it that. But certainly something that I don't think anyone's really talked about a lot. And now that we have access to, like, I watched a sales video today on a thing that's it's not even a qPCR, but it's a little microbial sequencer that can connect to your phone, and it's like $2,000, right? And you can take like hundreds of samples a day in the field. You can bring it with you out in the field and just start fucking putting samples in it, right? Like, that's going to be a game changer in the next 1 to 2 years. It's going to be this quantum leap in genetic data, because suddenly the stuff that we all had to send out to people, I can sequence immediately. And what do you do with, like, we almost have to have something that is akin to like a non-fungible token to immediately, like, if I had to protect that kind of data, because if I'm putting all that out there, hey, if you could take something and make the software to where it would directly connect from that sequencing data directly into like a non-fungible token type, again, not that, but something that would function as a blockchain record on a ledger, I guess maybe that's the better way to put it. That would then record that, hey, I was the first one to record this in the blockchain ledger, and no one can ever fuck with that, right? Like, it's the same way that Bitcoin works and all that, right? So that could be a way that allows people to at least say, hey, I was the first one. And then if you want to go back later on and then protect that, or say Monsanto ends up starting to mass produce it, and you just want to say, fuck you, Monsanto, and you already had that on the ledger, that would give you the ability to go back and pull the carpet up from them, in that way. That something like that, I would pay on like a per entry basis for, or even maybe, I don't know how you would financially support that. Maybe a subscription service to maintain the thing. But something that just, I think that could be a kind of a middle ground that.
That intrigues me that you say that, because it reminds me a lot of, I can't remember the expression, backyard patent or whatever, where someone basically that invents, I don't know, a better mousetrap, they basically print it out on, whatever, computer paper they have or whatever, and essentially mail it to themselves and a couple of people. And that goes for a book or any kind of, intellectual property. Basically, they will essentially mail themselves a copy with a sealed postmark. They won't open the envelope, and it'll have a post date on it. And all it does really is, in the event of being sued, is kind of show like, oh, I was the first person, I existed with this way before you say that you took this, or blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Like, how do I put it? It wasn't a lot of protection, but it was something. So like, people have been doing stuff like that for ages, kind of to protect themselves against, like, even if they go, the dude that there's a couple movies about the dude that invented wiper blades, and then he basically like took it to a bunch of car companies, and the Ford decided to just rip him off. And so he had to basically go through like 30 years of freaking litigation through this, even though he had the patents and everything. How do I put it? Stuff like kind of being able to prove intellectual ownership kind of puts you ahead of that, basically, is I guess what I was trying to say. I guess that's a bad one.
Yeah, that used to be a really common thing, actually. And in 2012, they did some changes to the IP system. So the US patent system is now first to file. It used to be first to conceptualize, and that was very useful. But like you said, for books or things like that, it's still a useful technique. And yeah, great that you mentioned that. And anyone who's writing a book that's listening, send yourself a copy of it in the mail. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, no, not for anything that's anything that's patent related or later patentable. That's no longer a defense for.
Good to know.
It's a little frustrating, but it does mean that then people have to put it more publicly in order to claim that right in the future. If you publish a copywritten work and then it becomes widely seen, then you don't necessarily have to register the copyright. Just it being widely seen or seeable can be just the presumption that it is that people have access to it. So later, if someone is misappropriating it, using it improperly, then you go like, hey, this is had access to this just like everyone else in society. This was here. So in an envelope, if you just send that to yourself, it doesn't have that same thing. So yeah, and I think it was 2012 that did shift. So that's a less applicable tactic, but still a good historical one. I remember doing that before I could afford a patent. Some of my startups before 2012. I was a little disappointed when that changed, actually.
Probably changed due to litigation from big entities, I would imagine, right? Like Apple and Facebook and whatever, no?
Yeah, lobbying under the Obama administration from big actors like that, exactly. They didn't try to hide it. It was all in the open. Big internet actors. And this is an interesting thing, that in that ecosystem, they may not have defeated the big actors. We could have a whole debate on whether you can actually defeat the big actors in the current system in any way. But they did successfully connect the big actors into an ecosystem which values the small actors and allows them to still be a part of it and benefit from the whole thing. I think that's really key here. A lot of people in cannabis are like, yeah, let's suit up for this battle with corporate cannabis. Like, I've been in a battle with big corporate people, and when they start throwing down millions of dollars that goes to fight you, it's like I've had private investigators break into my house. I've had them wire my internet up and then threaten me explicitly in emails about that they have the information from the internet tapping, the devices on camera. And
I had an incident with another guy I was working for that was in a patent thing, and they broke into his apartment and blamed me because I had a key, and I was doing a video game live stream, and I was like, nah, here's a video of exactly where the fuck I was. I was playing World of Warcraft. I got a whole guild worth of witnesses and a live stream to prove it. Like, wasn't me. Anyways, it was funny.
That's what's up. Yeah, totally. They pull tricks like that all the time. I mean, so like in my whole patent and civil litigation in my previous career, like with green energy, they did some crazy stuff to the point where I took the opposing attorney to the bar and fought real hard and got him disbarred. So, I still didn't save my patent. They did super illegal stuff, and the attorney, or I brought him to the bar, and he's no longer bar enrolled. They took his license, so I still don't have the patent, right? You can fight this thing really hard, and the force of it, the insidiousness of the system, when it's pumped with investor money, and the way that lawyers will play it, the way that this whole corporate machine is built, when they teach like hostile takeover techniques at colleges like Yale in their business department, there's whole courses on it, that we can't think we're going to suit up and fight and win against corporate cannabis come federal legalization. And when it's backed and, it's players on the scale of Google or Monsanto or Marlboro, we need to be pragmatic. And the only way that we can win is if we all together, or a large amount of us as a community, come together. We create something that it works better for everybody. If that's the way it works, then when the big players come in, the big money comes in, they don't need to flip over boats. They just plug in, and it's built in a way that it benefits all of us little guys for them to come into the space. It may not be the victory that we would dream of. It may not be absolute control by the little guys. It may not be like back in the day when we could just grow out and we were the growers, but it will be, if done right, an ecosystem that puts us on the same level as the big players. And that comes with additional perks that we didn't have, like we were saying earlier, the genetic testing abilities, the pathogen testing, these large scale data set opportunities. So it's a trade-off. And if we go in and we try to fight and we try to dragon slay against these corporate entities, it's just setting ourselves up for a bloodbath instead of where we could set ourselves up to benefit from them being in the field, and not benefit on an individual basis, but benefit as a community, benefit not by each signing up for this hegemonic group that's coming in and choosing which hegemony we want, but by creating a system where it isn't a hegemony, where the big guys come in and their resources help build this thing that we already have going. We already have a great community. We already have a great system. We already work together as a community. We just need to keep that going and upscale it and formalize it to this next layer so that next layer isn't built for us.
I mean, when you say like it doesn't better, it probably won't benefit the individual or whatever, I was just thinking to myself, like, why not? Like that's kind of the key. We could have a different way. What am I trying to say? There could be a better way. We could all freaking kumbaya or whatever. But I guess what I'm trying to say is like we always assume that the corporate entities will come in and steamroll everything because that's just what they seem to do. But on some level, I was thinking to myself, well, shit. Beer varieties are not patented. We're always talking about on my show, like all the cool new beers are coming up from like the beer competitions, whatever. And that's just literally like open source and the recipes are open source. And I was thinking to myself, like even cannabis strains, you don't even need to patent those things. You could have a line and then nobody else will potentially have your line unless they had your genetic material. And so it'll be like the secret spices or secret recipe, whatever. You'll just hold on to that. And through your kind of trade secrets, you'll work that line and do your thing. And for example, if some small scale breeder, this is kind of the fantasy part of my story, if some small scale breeder comes along and has something that could benefit that line that you're working on, you could go and you could buy those seeds. So these gigantic corporate entities, instead of steamrolling everything into oblivion, could basically be the phenotype testers for small scale breeders. Small scale breeders, their problem is always, dude, I can't run 100,000 plant field. And then the big fucking breeder is like, dude, all we have is like robots and employees that don't give a shit. We need somebody who cares about 100,000 plants in a field. So if you combine those two fucking dots in a not sadistic way for a change, you could actually do really cool stuff. Of course, it won't go that way because some asshole penny pinching dipshit will be like, well, no, but we could cut the asshole out and make more money. But like you could actually have this other system where everybody benefits. You know what I mean? Everybody could work together. Everybody could benefit. Like, what do I care if Marlboro wants to have 100,000 million, whatever the fucks? As long as I have my own little enclave and they don't fuck with me, I don't care if they do whatever they want. Like there's a way that we could even work together. You know what I mean? I could give them cool shit that they would work for me. You know what I mean? And like everything would be better. Maybe not Marlboro, but you know what I mean? I'm babbling enough.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's that is exactly what we want. And like we see that today where Google is paying programmers, to work on open source technologies. And a great example is with Twitter, where Twitter paid for the continued development of the Signal app. And Signal app is a whole open source communication system, secure communication. It's a great system, Signal. You can use it to text securely, video call, and call securely. And Twitter wanted the programmers who were on it. The programmers who were on it had built some code that was benefiting Twitter through the open source system. And they were like, great. So they became an investor in the Signal enterprise and then has backed that continued development. And all they want out of the deal is that the open source system continue to be built because it benefits Twitter, So that's just a couple of guys, who happen to create this really good system. And the system happened to have things in it that would benefit the big players. And the big players are like, that's great. We want more of that. Let's pay you to keep doing it. I think that's a lot of breeders might think like, oh, the idea of intellectual property is so alluring. I can assure that I get money out of this and resource out of this in the future. But it's like, actually, wouldn't you rather just keep doing what you're doing feel a sense of protection and then maybe even get a paycheck just to keep putting out good varieties into the public good. You know, if you ask yourself as a breeder, like, which is better, it's pretty clear that just being on a retainer to continually be paid to do what you love, to do what you chose to do and wanted to do with a sense of protection, that's a lot better of an option. And that's what pragmatically working with these forces looks like. You know, I'm wary, as many people are, of these large scale cannabis entities and the for-profit motives that they carry. And yeah, having some system that puts the community first, like a nonprofit system and the ecosystem surrounding it, then allows for that for-profit motive to be mitigated. And just like we see with software, it can be transformed to fuel the little guys, you know, fuel that continued innovation. And it's going to work for the big guys too, you know. There's a reason why it's been adopted, because the ideas just get better. You can just make better ideas when there's so many more people involved, and when there's, like you were saying, so many more testers involved, and so much more access to data than being siloed. So if it's there, if it's in existence, it's a no-brainer. You're coming in, you're big corporate, you're like, yeah, I'll connect into this because I benefit, and okay, sure, other people benefit. I mean, that's what we want, is for us, everybody, to benefit in the community. Yeah.
I mean, you were saying, like, how do I put this? What does the seed breeder want to do, right? Like, what does a breeder want to do with their seeds? Sometimes they might think, oh, I want to protect my seeds with patents or whatever, because they don't know what's coming. But like, does that breeder want to be, what was the dragon's name in Lord of the Rings? I can't remember, or in The Hobbit. Whatever, but he's basically this fucking Smog. Fucking dragon's sitting there on a pile of gold. He's not spending the gold. He's not going on vacations with the gold. He's a dragon. He could fly, right? But still, like, whatever. In the story, the dragon's super into gold and just sits there on this goddamn pile of gold and doesn't do anything with it. And most breeders would not really be into that. They're like, oh, I'm sitting on my pile of seeds that's not doing anything. Says no happy breeder. You know, they actually want their seeds to be grown. And on some level, I think they want to find new and new and new and new. And so on some level, if you abolished, which, you know, people tease this idea out, right? Like, you know, the fanciful hippies that don't know what they're talking about. You know, I'm being farcical, right? Like, they probably do know what they're talking about, but they say, like, hey, what if we actually abolished some of these intellectual property laws and actually got rid of patents and stuff, or changed them, or made them really short term? What then? And honestly, like, oh my God, the sky's falling. But also, what then is people would only focus on always creating new shit. And so, like, honestly, on some level, if you wanted to see the craziest, the most amazing cannabis ever, you would abolish all those patent laws, and you'd basically say, okay, go run your stuff. And then people would just go run their stuff, and nobody would have protections. Everybody would have to, hey, if somebody rips off such and such, okay, well, that's life. Now they get to run their stuff. Now you get to run your stuff, and on it would go. How do I put this? It would be a different market than we have right now. So it's a little bit unpredictable, but you would have an incredible variety of cannabis, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we're coming out of an era where some of that was true. You know, we had prohibition by the government, but we had this sense of sharing, and there's some pretty awesome cannabis. I mean, they made some cool cannabis, not, you know, not hoarding it away. I liked your example of, like, Smog sitting on his pile of gold, and it's like, it's like gold that's not even worth anything if you don't use it. You know, gold might be like an investment, but it's even worse than sitting on your pile of gold, because if you don't get those seeds out there, someone else is going to make seeds and overcome those breeding goals and get to the next level of progress. And so yeah, this is the sort of thing that I can see it, like, building to where like, why wouldn't you put your thing into this system? Because then it continues to stay up to date. You know, we see this with open source software all the time. It's like continually updating, because people are continually finding an issue and then making this fix for it and then uploading it. And so that continual push is yeah, I mean, I for one, I mean, I'm not on the large scale of seed breeders. I'm very amateur in my breeding, but I for one would love to see some of the issues that I come up against in my breeding just be ironed out, you know, out there in the world. Maybe I can't get it all perfect, but I got like 3/4 of those objectives good, and it's ready for release, let's say. And then I get it out there and I see, oh my gosh, those were overcome. And we see this happen in the world, you know, someone will give someone else a cut, right? And say, oh, I've been breeding it to make it really hardy for this type of conditions. And then the second person crosses it with something, phenohunts through it, does some deep selection, maybe a couple rounds of that, and they flick it back to the person. And the first person is like, this is awesome. You made it even better. That's great. They keep doing work on it. I mean, that's how like old school, like Neville and those people did that all the time. So this is the type of system we want, right? Is this share it back and forth, keep improving, keep improving, keep improving. I don't want to get seeds that I can't make better. Like, if I get a bunch of seeds and then it's like, you can't breed with these and you can't do anything with them, you can't give your mom the weed that comes from this, it's your medicine, marijuana, and any seeds that come out of this, you have to burn. I don't want that, because I want to be able to make it better. Like where I'm growing right now is right next to a swamp. And when I'm going through selection, it's like, it's fierce and it's noticeable when it's better than the last, you know, because it survives the exposure to the swamp better, you know. Nobody has the exact same swamp except my neighbors, right? And so if my neighbors and I get some seeds, we want to be able to improve them. We want to make it work for the swamp. And I think that that's it's a big plus. That's like another big plus for small scale breeders. You know, Steve, you were asking earlier, how will groups that have just been hanging out in their small community breeding, maybe mom and pop operations, how would they be benefited from this? Well, I mean, there's one, you put it out there and then someone is like, hey, I fixed this little issue with it for you. And then they get it back and they're like, that's awesome. That part always bugged me about it. Or, you know, oh, it was always a little bit nitrogen finicky and get burned, or, you know, whatever, right? And now it's like durable and puts that straight into growth or whatever. So I think that's an advantage. And then we also don't get copycats in the same way. Like if we have a data bank of all the submitted varieties and you put your variety in, and then someone else tries to submit that same variety, then it's going to come up and our organization is going to be like, hey,
we got to find a way to feed this. Oh, I'm sorry, I got a delay. This happens on Fumidor sometimes. Go ahead.
No, it's all good. I was just saying that having that sort of system is really useful, because very often we see in the community people saying like, oh, this person stole my strain, they just renamed it, and this is a big problem. I should have my credit for what I built. And I, as an inventor and as someone who is also endeavoring to breed, I feel very strongly about, you know, if you create something, you deserve to get the recognition for that, right? And so if a copycat strain is out there and yours is already submitted to copyleft, then you go, hey, can you submit yours to copyleft real quick, and we'll settle this, you know? It's not this whole he said, she said, oh, it looks like his picture is, well, actually, no, it's just slightly related. Well, no, we just do the genetic sequence, boom, boom, and there's one centralized certification authority. Then those small mom and pop operations don't have to suffer losing their credit. You know, we had the grassroots public interest meeting. Thanks for covering that, Fumidor. And one of the things that was brought up, Clackamas Coot mentioned his experience with people taking credit for some of his strains, as he said. And this is like, even if he doesn't want to release those strains except to some friends, this prevents those issues, because then he can later even get a copy of those seeds. Let's say a seed bank is selling it, he can get that and then run it through the copyleft system again, and if it comes back as a duplicate, there's a clear line of evidence there. There's a non-disputability of it, and it's that's something that our community struggles with. I see it pretty frequently. It's the authenticity of the genetics. Is this the real lemon sour diesel? But really, is it the real lemon sour diesel? Okay, but which OG Kush? Right. And yeah, we're at a point where we got data, we got testing. We shouldn't be putting up with 6 different strains that have nothing to do with each other, all being called the same thing just because somebody wanted it to be, or one strain called 6 different things because 6 people wanted to, or 5 people wanted to say that they bred it and one person actually did. So these sorts of things, it just simplifies it, having central databasing.
It would potentially, I don't know, even if I guess I'm saying something different, but how do I say this? I'm just trying to kind of envision something different with all these kind of patent laws and how everything is getting more and more closed. If we opened things up, we wouldn't have to worry about how do I put this? I guess without mentioning any names, there's a bunch of breeders out there that kind of, as soon as you mention their name, there's a bunch of hate because there's a bunch of kind of back and forth. There's some breeders that think that some other breeders basically stole cuts or lines of theirs or seeds that they popped and then basically renamed into something else. And on some level, that's genetics, of course, and on some other level, if you've ever done anything like that, that feeling of being ripped off. But one of the reasons why I think people have that feeling of ripped off, and even creating that incentive for people to do the ripping off and change the name, is because there are these kind of potential intellectual property things. Whereas if you removed that and basically made it open source and said, bro, the information is available over at SolShine's, that's the such and such. If you removed all that kind of mystery and the potential, financial ramifications of owning that strain from it, people could basically say, no, bro, this is the such and such perps from so-and-so and blah, blah, blah. And they could just say, yep, it was awesome. I took it and I moved it on. If you want to know more about it, if you wanted to know more about it, you would just follow, I guess, Steve's kind of intellectual blockchain up the river to find who bred that original perps, and you could maybe go and talk to them again. But how do I say this? You would know where it came from a little bit better because nobody would have an incentive to kind of change the name for financial gain. I don't know. I guess I'm this is a hippie mentality. Maybe it's not gonna go that way probably, but it could. You know what I mean? We could have open intellectual property on strains. We could have not patented lines and whatever else that you just work. And if someone wanted to work it, they would work it and they would say, yes, that's the so-and-so from so-and-so. I don't know. Anyway.
I think there's a middle way, I like the philosophy of the Buddha a lot, and the Buddha talks about the middle way, the middle path, and in any extreme situation, I find it very prudent to look for the middle way. To me, copyleft is the middle way here. There is the extreme end of no protection, just total open source. And I think we've seen that with strains so far. It has served us great in a conventional or underground market, but it is a difficult and undefended position to be in a formalized market. On the other end, there's the extreme of extreme asset ownership and the idea of turning everything conceptual into an asset, which is privatized, which has ownership by a specific named entity, whether that's a person or a business, and that it can be exchanged the same as currency or the same as an investment vehicle, and thus litigated about in the same ways and swept up when people go bankrupt and all sorts of things like that. And to me, in the middle of those two extremes lies copyleft and these sorts of protected measures which utilize a system of intellectual property, which utilize a system that's already in place and, part of the governmental system of laws that we live within, and then which prioritizes that community good, which allows for that openness, but doesn't have the naivete of just assuming that it will all be treated well and not locked down. You know, I really like with the general public license in software how it, which is what this open cannabis license is based off of. It talks about not restricting the rights of yourself and others, not asking others to give up rights. And when we think about our human rights and our rights as individuals, these aren't things that just existed in nature in the way that they do today. You know, we built these and struggled for these human rights and these rights as people. And so when we give them up in order to interact with software or interact with food or grow plants, that is a loss. It's a loss of something that has been fought for, that we are benefited by. You know, we all benefit from freedom of speech, and we feel that we can be more open in our speech and speak more clearly and speak, you know, better without the halters of that right being missing. And I think the same thing is true with copyleft, where that right to use the farmer material, to use the seed material, the plant material, with a sense of freedom, that right is something that deserves to be defended. It's something that deserves to be upheld and that we really value, and that actually creates a sense of freedom that fosters creativity, that fosters the creation of new things. And so I think that these are able to click together, you know, the two extremes, the extreme open and the extreme lockdown. You know, they actually, if you just fit them together the right way, they can support each other. It seems paradoxical, but it's a, you know, a stronger when we're together sort of situation. There's places where the rules of law with intellectual property may actually serve some great function. And if we build that, those angles on it to prioritize openness and community, then I think that's a stronger system. You know, it's integrated the strength of the privatized side, strength of the maybe legal mechanization, in with the interconnectedness and the open building and that bizarre approach, that trading, that open progress mentality. It clicks them in together, you know, the chaos and order in this middle dance together. And that's what we want for innovation, is chaos and order dancing into new beautiful form.
That's some intellectual yin yang shit, bro.
Yeah, I'm into it. I think it's all about balance. It's all about balance and being pragmatic, you know. I wish it was 1,000 ways, you know, but it is how it is. What happens in the future will be based on what is today. And we have to plan, you know, we have to plan in a balanced way that takes into account reality today and that works towards the tomorrow that we want.
How optimistic are you, SolShine, about all this? I feel like I asked you this on my show, and I don't know if anything's changed. Like, are you do you feel like you're fighting a valiant and yet ultimately losing fight, or do you think that there's a real chance that we'll have like an open source kind of, I don't know, at least a second or third different way, a middle way, so to speak, of kind of cannabis IP? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm very hopeful. I think that we have the perfect timing. If you know, it's I can only do what I can do, and there are already a good number of people that are involved in putting in work, and I want to give a ton of gratitude and credit to those people also a whole Discord of people, and we welcome new people. You know, I'm always saying that, but I really, like, we want all the ideas, the community, you know, this is the strength of togetherness. And it's happening, you know, it's happening. 6 months ago when I started looking around to see if other people were moving this direction, I hadn't found anyone who was putting the pieces together formally. I found a lot of people that thought along similar lines, a lot of encouragement. And I think if things were not done, then yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be very hopeful. But I think that we have a lot that we can hope for if we do things, you know. And if you can't be involved in the organization formally and you're listening, you know, jump on to GoFundMe and toss us some cash so we can found this and get the nonprofit status and all of that. You know, it's not, there are some lawyers that are putting some free time, but we want to pay them at some point too, you know, like respect and let us all eat and whatnot. And yeah, if we all put in the effort that we can, and this all comes together, I feel incredibly hopeful. It doesn't need to become the standard. It just needs to exist. It just needs to exist, because then there's the bastion of freedom, you know, and then it's continually building. It's continually building. It doesn't exist yet. And so it's a little bit like, oh man, the landscape is scary of intellectual property with cannabis. But as soon as there's this bastion of like, oh, this is actually like pretty rockin' and like really puts the community first and like really transparent and open, and it's there. It doesn't matter if there's 2 varieties. Doesn't matter if there's only 1 variety at first. It builds. More people put in more varieties. More preservationists are supported and click in their projects. And, you know, we continue to build it from there. And then if we have an issue later on, like at least it's already there. If there's big patent litigation happening in another area of the cannabis community, or big IP litigation, people can look at this space, this you know, autonomous zone of freedom, so to speak, that we've created here, where people can come together and have reprieve from that. And so yeah, I don't think that I don't think it's doom and gloom at all. I think it's a super hopeful story, and I think that you know, people like me and you and Steve, you as well, and all of the listeners and people that are passing on the information, it's happening. You know, there's people working on this that I don't even know and I haven't met yet, and who have ideas that are going to continue to be the breakthroughs, and that is so empowering to me. So yeah, I'm super hopeful about it. In fact, more hopeful than last time we talked, because I see it coming together. I see it coming together, and I see that there's no need for it to be the be all end all. You know, people can get their patents if they want. People can public domain it if they want. And I just so happen to think, and based off of my experience and my pretty deep inside look, being dragged through the IP system a couple times, that this is the most pragmatic and the best angle, you know, copyleft to protect and preserve the breeders and the cultivators and the genetics. So I'm really hopeful about it.
Oh man. What were you saying about, you said something about cool, pardon me, cool people you haven't met. And I think about that sometimes, how you may not have even met some of your best friends yet. You know what I mean? Like, unless you're 110 years old, maybe even then you haven't met your best friend. Maybe you'll live another 5 years. That happens. But how do I put it? Like, a lot of people that are in something new like this, or copyleft, you're just getting started. Like, I don't know, anything in life really, you may still yet have to, you have yet to have met your best or most productive partner or friend or person you clicked with yet. You know what I mean? Like, you can always kind of be optimistic for that literally around the corner will be somebody that will be like, dude, that freaking guy or that chick or whatever, that chick gets me, and you're together, your ideas are more salient, or maybe they come along and suddenly they fill a hole in copyleft. Like, oh, we didn't have a so-and-so. And then suddenly that person walks in like, oh, what's this basically? And how do I put this? You didn't even know them. Now, 6 months from now, they're like, you know, you're attached at the hip. Like, that kind of stuff happens all the time when you look back on your own life. You know what I mean? So I'm just basically like kind of marveling on that little thing. Like, it pays to be optimistic sometimes that, you know, like, fuck, you don't know what's coming along.
Yeah, why not be optimistic, right? I mean, be pessimistic, be optimistic isn't going to change it, you know? Optimistic feels better. Right on. So, yeah, I'm really excited about where this is headed, and I just want to call in those people, you know, I just want to call in anyone who's listening to this. Maybe you haven't been exposed to the copyleft idea in the past. Maybe you have been exposed to it in other contexts and you want to get involved. We'd love to have you involved. So go ahead and jump on the Discord. There's the link on copyleftcannabis.org, also copyleftcannabis.com. And yeah, I would love to hear from you and connect the allies, because that's what this is all about, you know, interconnecting the community and creating this idea ecosystem, updating it into this new form where it can work well for all of us in this new world that we're all in, you know, new world the industry and community is entering into.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming on. Yeah, why don't you tell everybody again what your website is and how people can find you if they want to get involved, and then what your Instagram and stuff is too.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, and thanks everybody watching. I really appreciate it. Really, the first thing is just, if you like what you hear, if you take this moment now, you feel inside yourself, you want this to happen, spread the word, number one. And then number two, you can jump on our GoFundMe, and that's creating copyleft cultivars on GoFundMe. Also the link on our copyleftcannabis.org. That helps us pay for the formation of the organization, to bring this beautiful license up to date and available to you, and also working on that nonprofit, not-for-profit. So yeah, jump over, contribute to the GoFundMe. Also, if you want a cool shirt like this says copyleft cultivars and copyleft cannabis. There's a couple different ones. This is the copyleft cultivars one, and it's my fractals. That's actually cannabis, probiotic, organic cannabis that I grew and then turned into fractal kaleidoscopes. So you can catch that at the Contrado shop. So that's all also linked on the website, copyleftcannabis.org. And then also the Instagram, copyleft cannabis on Instagram. You can jump on the mailing list, again, on the website, copyleftcannabis.org. And then you can also find me on Instagram at SolShine Growing. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear all the ideas, all the feedback. Even if you don't like the idea, I want to hear about it. Like, really, community input is key. So yeah, jump on there, copyleftcannabis.org, get on the mailing list, contribute to the GoFundMe, join the Discord, join the discussion, and love to have you involved. Looking forward to making this possible for the community. Again, thanks so much, Steve. Thanks, Fumidor, for jumping on, and thanks everybody for listening. Much love, everybody.
Heck yeah, I'm happy to support you and have kind of see the spiritual successor of what, you know, really set out to be a good thing that was kind of sabotaged because of the financing aspect of it. Be kind of carried on in spirit into by someone I think truly is trying to do the right thing, and certainly been asking the right questions and doing the right homework, and you know, I've certainly been trying to help put you in touch with the right people that at least are knowledgeable on this to you know, help steer you as best you can and give you some extra resources, or at least some people that went through some of the circuses before that could at least help you know what to avoid, you know.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah, big shout out to all the people that have been working on this from all the angles, all the industries. Like, as many great scientists have said, we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, the giants who came before us. And I'm honored to stand on those shoulders. Thanks for propping me up onto some of those shoulders, Steve. And I'm excited to be shoulders for more people.
Yeah. What about you? Fumidor, why don't you tell everybody how to find you and your stuff? For those of you guys that don't know, Fumi is the show that I go when I want to not keep track of 10,000 things and just kind of relax and have fun. And we often end up shooting the shit with a lot of cool people, Clackamas Coot on a regular basis and others. So if you enjoy the content on here and me and him rambling like idiots, you'll certainly enjoy our much longer version of ramblings on Fumidors. If you like kind of the preview version of my channel, you have the I think him and I went or a couple of times we've gone 6-7 hours on your show.
One of the first times you were on, you were talking with Coot until like 3 o'clock in the morning, and then Coot had to like tap out because he was basically passing out, and that was the only end of the show. Yeah, like basically we hi guys, we've been babbling in your ears the whole show. You're like, who the fuck is that guy? I run this show I call Chronic Table basically, but it's at my channel Fumidor at the Flavors. If you look up on YouTube, Fumidor at the Flavors, or look in the chat or whatever, I guess. Anyway, we like to have a, I don't know, what do I call it, like a cocktail party with weed, kind of, you know, because weed has been illegal. It should have never been illegal, but if it had never been illegal, we'd have these kind of weird little groups that we'd have, you know, like a bar, you know, like a bar that you pop in, or a pub or whatever, or a coffee shop. You pop in with your friends, or, you know, in the UK, they have that kind of pub culture. Everyone comes and says hello. It's kind of that thing. We have regulars, we have friends that pop in, and people in the chat that hop in, and we allow everybody, or I guess allow everybody. It's an open door kind of policy. Like, you don't have to be an experienced grower. You don't have to be a beginner grower. You can be all those things. And we get to have like different perspectives as a result of that. You know, like we have really, really advanced growers like you and Coot, any number of other people that come by that have big gardens and have been doing it for a long time, but they have a conversation. They share a conversational space with, you know, folks that got started a couple of years ago, and we end up having really kind of, I think, fruitful and also interesting discussions. So another thing that I always sometimes forget about this, but I'm always trying to integrate the kind of food and wine and kind of culinary aspects of life in with cannabis. So this coming show on Saturday is going to be Brews with Buds, and so that's where we have like not just beer, but also microbrew beer and coffee and, you know, wine. Some people come on with a glass of wine. In fact, SolShine will probably come on with a glass of wine. And the whole idea is that we just kind of integrate the things that would normally be integrated. You know what I mean? Like, you don't eat cheese by itself, you eat it with other food. So like, you'll have cannabis with your lunch, and you'll have it with your wine, you'll have it with this. And so we kind of do that on my show. So anyway, I guess I'll stop rambling, but hope you guys stop by. Fumidor and the Flavors, and we like to goof off Tuesdays, sort of secretly Wednesdays, and Saturdays we're on in the evenings. Anyway, cheers guys.
Yeah, man, thanks for coming on, and yeah, always enjoy hanging out on Fumidor's show. Again, if you haven't checked it out, I'll put a thing in the description. But definitely a fun show, and a little bit different format. I think your analogy with the bar is great. You know, we have we kind of just shoot the shit. You're linking like different topics that are not necessarily cannabis, but something that's like cultural related to the scene, and it's just fun. It's just like relaxed, and a lot of times people get on funny rants, and oh man, that's good.
Appreciate that, dude. Cheers.
Yeah, and you guys can find me at Aquaponic Cannabis or Potent Ponics at SoundCloud, iTunes, Spotify, all the things. Sorry, my brain is in 10 paces right now. I'm getting ahead of myself. You can also find us at apmjclass.com, which I'm going to link here. Marty and I have a full in-depth online aquaponic cannabis training class. We cover all different types of stuff. We're constantly adding new content. We have live sessions each month. We have all types of handouts, and we're always adding to this kind of library of knowledge that you pay to have access to. And we're going to be working on, it's kind of a buy-in, and then you pay a small fee just to pay for the upgrades each year for the new content. So it kind of makes it affordable for people. We're going to be doing a home version of that, so it'll be a little bit, you know, minus the commercial stuff that's not really relevant, and make it a little more affordable. And some other cool classes coming later in the year. And then also check out apmjnewts.com if you're looking for nutrients for your aquaponic cannabis website or your facility. We have a whole bunch of different stuff available, either in kits that make it simple so you can just buy it and forget it, Or if you want to dose it yourself, we sell everything in 1 and 4 pound amounts. We will happy to sell you more than that. Just you send us a thing and we'll give you a quote for more than that. So, and all this stuff comes with instructions on dosing and all that. So it helps for cannabis growers. And we really just started it because people kept asking me, what's the source where I can buy fish safe stuff? So I got together with the guy from True Aquaponics, and all of our stuff on here, when used as directed, is fish safe. So you don't have to worry about killing your fish or anything else. So and then be sure to check out, if you're in Austin, I will be speaking at the Lucky Leaf Expo here in Austin on May 15th. I'm on the cultivation panel, which I think is at 11 a.m. I got to double check. And then I'm also on for the aquaponics talk, I believe is 1 o'clock. Again, I got to double check that, but they just sent me an updated schedule. I haven't had a chance to open the email, but check this out here. And then if not, I'll also be in Dallas, July 9th and 10th, Houston, November 5th and 6th, Albuquerque, February 25th and 26th, and Oklahoma City, September 3rd and 4th, Jacksonville, Mississippi, October 8th and 9th, and Albuquerque is in February, or maybe I read it. I'm tired. But come check it out. If you're going to be in Austin, or if you're going to be down at South by Southwest, hit me up. Let's hang out. I got some other cool people I'll be down there with. So it's going to be a fun time for sure if you're one of us. So we'll definitely have fun when we're down there. So I will see you guys next time, and we will catch you guys next week. We may or may not have a show. I will be traveling to Austin next week, so we might not have a show next week, but if we don't, we'll do some live stuff from the conference for sure.